If you do not wish to have your voice recorded, please do not speak during the call. And if you do not wish to have your image recorded, please turn off your camera or participate by phone. If you speak during the call or use a video connection, you are presumed consent to recording and use of your voice or image. As another reminder, DOE does not recognize AI tools such as meeting assistants as authorized recording/transcribing tools and will not allow unverified participants, possible AI bots in the meeting from any commercially available services, including but not limited to Read.ai, Otter.ai, and Fireflies.ai that provide meeting transcription, meeting assistance, and meeting recap capabilities. Any violations of these policies will be reported. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to open with an introduction about invoicing processes, procedures, and key players. Then we'll move on to a discussion of award terms and conditions, and followed by a deep dive into the required invoicing documents, including the invoicing template, the SF-270 form, and supporting documentation. Then we're going to review DOE's invoicing system, which is Vipers. We're going to review the invoice review and approval process, go over some resources, open the floor to questions, and at the end of the slide deck, there's an appendix section for your future reference. Next slide, please. We want to start the presentation today by providing a big picture overview of everyone's roles and responsibilities during the invoicing process. This slide highlights everyone's roles and responsibilities, and we're going to go through those really quickly. Subrecipients and contractors submit their individual invoices to the prime recipient for inclusion in the overall DOE invoice. The prime recipient ensures subrecipient and contractor invoices are sufficient. They compile the invoice documents to DOE and send them off to their TPO via email. Invoice documents include the subrecipient and contractor invoices provided. And the prime recipient also uploads to Vipers upon TPO approval. The TPO, or Technical Project Officer, is going to review those invoices for completeness and accuracy before submission to the Grants Management Specialist, and they'll provide any feedback and requested edits to the prime recipient. The Grants Management Specialist reviews the invoice for compliance with DOE regulations before then routing to the Contracting Officer. And the Grants Management Specialist also provides feedback to the TPO to relay back to the prime recipient. The Contracting Officer conducts the final review and approves the invoice and then authorizes payment. So this whole invoicing process concludes when a payment is deposited into the recipient's account. Next slide, please. So this next slide is a flow chart depicting the invoicing process as a timeline. So first, the subrecipients and/or contractors will submit their individual invoices to the prime recipient for inclusion in the overall DOE invoice. Next, the awardees will draft the invoicing documents and share these documents with their technical project officer via email for review. The TPO will complete an initial review to ensure all components are detailed and the information is correct. Once approved by the TPO will share these documents with the assigned Grants Management Specialist. We also refer to this person as the GMS, who is the second reviewer at DOE. Once the TPO has the GMS's authorization, the TPO will follow up with the recipient and provide authorization for the recipient to submit their invoice documents into Vipers, which is DOE's vendor invoicing portal and electronic reporting system. To create a Vipers account, you will need your organization's EIN number and your award number, which is located in box 1 of your assistance agreement. Once the documents are uploaded into Vipers, the DOE team will review and ensure compliance with DOE's regulations. DOE will then approve the invoice as soon as possible with a goal of 30 calendar days after the request is submitted. One caveat is that if there are any issues found in the invoice submission, it may take longer than 30 days for processing. Next slide, please. So here is a checklist of key factors to keep in mind when compiling your invoicing documents. The prime recipient should compile all documentation from subrecipients and vendors and confirm the costs are reasonable, allowable, and allocable to the SOPO tasks for the invoice period. They should ensure that there are no holds or conditions on the funds being requested, for example, contractor holds, NEPA and BABA, and that all costs are aligned with the approved budget categories. The cost share percentage requirement must be met on each invoice, and invoice dates and amounts must be accurate and reflect the dates listed on the SF-270 and invoice template. Note that the first invoice should not precede your award date unless you were approved for pre-award costs. And we'll go into the relationship between invoicing and pre-award in just a moment. The prime recipient needs to provide all of the required invoicing documents, which are the SF-270 request for advance or reimbursement form, supporting documentation, for example, contractor invoices, personnel and fringe costs, etc., and the DOE invoicing template, which is an Excel file. The prime recipient will email the invoice documents to their technical project officer to review and approve before uploading into Vipers. Next slide, please. So as promised, we will review the relationship between pre-award costs and invoicing and overview how that works for those selectees who have requested pre-award costs. As a reminder, pre-award costs are requested by the selectee during negotiations to request future reimbursement for SOPO-aligned work on tasks that began before the award was made by DOE. Pre-award costs must be approved by the DOE contracting officer during negotiations. Activities are limited to planning, design, and administrative activities so as not to impact compliance with NEPA. Pre-award costs are incurred at the selectee's own risk, assuming that an award will be made. So once an award is made, the recipient is eligible to request reimbursement for approved pre-award costs incurred during negotiations. In the first invoice, the recipient can select the start date of the invoice period to match the date noted in the pre-award cost approval letter. Otherwise, if pre-award costs were not requested, the start date of the first invoice should not precede the award date. I'll now pass the presentation off to my colleague Mariah, who is going to walk us through some relevant award terms and conditions.
Rachel. Okay, so if you recall last week's post-award training, your award package will include a document that's called your terms and conditions, or what we call your TNCs. And your TNCs outline grant requirements for your specific project. We ask that you review your TNCs thoroughly to understand the specific restrictions related to your award. Now, the bulleted list below represents key TNCs that impact your ability to invoice DOE. We're going to explore these in more detail in the following sections, or slides, actually. Next slide, please, Carmela. So invoices will be submitted into Vipers, which is DOE's vendor invoicing portal, by the prime organization. With each submission, the invoice must include an SF-270, which is a request for advance or reimbursement document, a DOE invoice template, which is an Excel file, and then any supporting documentation like vendor invoices, etc. We do ask that for all invoices, you send a draft copy of the documents that are listed on here for a pre-Vipers review to the DOE team. Now, the goal of this pre-review is to find and resolve any issues before entry into Vipers so it doesn't have to kick it back to you. Please tag your TPO, which is Beth or Ide, and your assigned project monitor in your Box account if you submit it through Box, or email invoices for the preliminary review. But we do ask that you use Box initially. So there are two types of reimbursements or payments, sorry. First is the reimbursement, where the recipient will pay for incurred costs up front and then will submit an invoice to be reimbursed by the DOE. The second version is an advance payment, which occurs when the recipient cannot cover incurred costs up front and requests federal funds in advance to manage cash flow. Now, DOE may provide working capital advances to cover estimated disbursement needs for your award. And the process for that is 5 days for the DOE to pay an invoice, and then an additional 5 days for the recipient to provide a proof of payment to DOE. So that means that within 5 business days of the DOE providing payment to you, you must provide proof of payment to your TPO via email, which including any type of documentation of those invoices being paid. Next slide, please. And now we kind of wanted to provide more context of what proof of payment can look like and the process for that. So you, as the recipient, will receive an invoice or invoices from vendors that are not paid. You will then input those incurred costs into that DOE invoicing template, which they will go through in more detail later, along with any other supporting documentation to your TPO. And that supporting documentation are going to be your vendor invoices or any other documentation that the invoice has been paid. And then on your SF-270, that request for advancement or reimbursement, you will mark advanced. Then, following the same kind of invoicing process, you will upload the invoice into Vipers upon that TPO initial approval. You will then receive the funds from DOE, and then you must pay that invoice within 5 days of receiving the funds. And the proof of payment can be a recipient wire transfer, a copy of a check, an invoice marked paid, or a general ledger. And then you will have to, or you must have to, provide Ida or Beth the proof of payment in an email documentation, and then they will send that documentation off to the DOE team to ensure compliance to receive the advanced payments. And next slide, please, Carmela. So now on to the funding of your budget periods. In block 13 of your assistance agreement that you received with your award package, you will find DOE's obligated funding amount for your award. And we do want to note that only the federal share of the costs associated with the current period of performance are available. So that means that currently your period of performance accounts for budget period 1 funds only. It is not until you are granted that an approved continuation application to enter into budget period 2 that all funds will be authorized. And we do just want to be clear that funds are obligated for the full amount of your awards. That is both budget period 1 and budget period 2. It's just that you are only authorized to spend what has been approved for budget period 1 right now, pending any contractual or subrecipient holds for budget period 1. Next slide, please. And so cost share, cost share is another important slide, and this really refers to the recipient share of the total cost of the award, So you must meet the cost share in terms of both the total dollar amount and the percentage of total cost on an invoice basis. So that means that the recipient must provide the cost share dollar amount that's stated in block 12 of your assistance agreement that's shown there in that little screenshot to the left. And then you're also required to provide cost share in the amount as a percentage of total project costs in each invoice. And then you can find these percentages for cost share in your special terms and conditions that are also on that right-hand screen. And we please do want to note that these are screenshots and scenarios that are examples only, and they should not be interpreted as representative of your award. You really should refer to your award documents for the exact cost share amount and percentages that are required for your specific award. Next slide, please. So how do you get subrecipients and contractors approved? The contracting officer must approve all subrecipients and vendors, and funding may not be expended without the contracting officer's approval. So all of the TBDs for subrecipients and vendors that are listed in your budget justification currently have holds placed on them for the corresponding funding amount. To remove those holds and to be able to invoice for this cost, you must submit the required procurement information that's shown on the right-hand screen in that blue box. And I'm not going to read everything in that box, but please refer to slide 11 to come back to really understand the differences in the types of federal procurement standards that vendors and subrecipients may fall under for your award. And we do want to remind you that all terms and conditions of award do apply to your subrecipients as well. So you, as the prime, are responsible for communicating these requirements, and that's including the NEPA requirements, allowable costs, and reporting requirements to your subrecipients. Next slide, please. And so for the actual approval process, we ask that you review the federal procurement standards that were outlined in the previous slide to confirm the appropriate methods that are based on the dollar amount threshold. Then you're going to document all of those procurement processes, the proposed selection, and send information in an email to Beth or Aide, your TPO, to add to your award file. And then your TPO will review and ask for any additional information if it's needed, and will send the appropriate information to the contracting officer for approval. And you'll see to the right an example of what Beth or Ide will have to send to the contracting officer. So we do ask that you review this example as it highlights the amount of detail your TPO needs to request approval to get those holds removed from your award. Next slide, please. Now, here are some other federal regulations to really keep your eye on throughout your award. And if you do click, oh, it doesn't look like they're linked, but all of the underlined sections are linked for you to be able to click and follow them for more resources on each and every one of these. So first is the Code of Regulations, which is 2 CFR 200. This is where you will refer to all standards of your award and all the COTS principles that are sectioned to it. Next is the NEPA, which we wanted to highlight that there are the irreversible, I can't speak today, actions that should not be taken before a final NEPA determination, and that is final design, equipment purchases, and physical activities. And then for BABA, which is Build America, Buy America, there are 2 pathways for compliance that we will dive into more detail at a later date, but those will be your certificates of compliance of proposed purchases or an approved non-availability waiver. And then finally, for the Davis-Bacon Act, oh, thank you for Michelle for chiming in, but for the Davis-Bacon Act, that will kick in when construction starts, and that will be when laborers and mechanics should be paid weekly at the prevailing wage for your county. And then project contractors will then report those payrolls into a system called LPC Tracker. And we keep on saying that that's going to come at a later date, but it is important that will be an important piece to the project when construction starts. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Aide to walk us through required invoicing documents.
Thank you, Mariah. Can everybody hear me okay? So thumbs up, awesome. Just an apology, I'm getting over a cold, so I will be taking just some breaks in the water and just get my breath. So you will be with me. This is the very fun invoicing documents overview. So we will be together for quite a few slides. So please just bear with me and please ask questions in the chat as they come up and we'll answer them to the best of our abilities. So there are 3 main components to each invoice package that you will submit to DOE. First is the DOE invoicing template. Now, this is an Excel file that documents the costs associated with your payment request and checks that you are meeting cost share on each invoice submitted. It takes information from the budget information as support to 4 attachment from your award package. You're only going to use the budget totals, as Mariah mentioned, for budget periods that have been approved for work. So for new awards, this will be budget period 1 funds only, again, pending those contractor approvals. The second component is your supporting documentation. These are various examples of supporting documentation required depending on the cost category. Examples include contractor invoices, timesheets, and cost share documentation. And we will see detailed examples in the coming slides. The third component of invoicing documents is the standard form 270 request for advance or reimbursement, also called the SF 270. And this is used by recipients to request advances or reimbursement. Now let's dive into the invoicing template and SF 270 for more detail. Next slide, please. The invoice template, like I said, this is an Excel file that DOE will upload to Box to get you started on your first invoice. Fields are color-coded to give guidance on who fills out what. So recipients will populate everything in the highlighted with a yellow box. DOE will populate those blue fields, while the orange, reddish fields are calculated or copied fields. So please do not enter data into these cells. Now, before we go into detail on each tab, we're just going to do a very high-level orientation of the invoice template. Now, bear with me. Carmela and I are going to swap screen share. So she's going to stop screen sharing so I can take over. Thank you, Carmela. And we will take a look at the invoicing template. All right. And again, a thumbs up. Can everybody see my screen? Sorry, y'all. Just want to make sure I don't want to get through. All right. Thank you. All right. All right, so the invoice template speaks to your budget justification. So you will see some similar tab names to the right down here. The first set of tabs, the invoice summary, invoice detail, and invoice history, focus on all things invoice. So this first one that we're looking at is your invoice summary. This will be a dashboard of key data, both concerning the current, right? We have the current invoice, and then it also has cumulative data related to your invoicing or your invoice history. Next is your invoice detail. This lists summary totals for invoices you are submitting for reimbursement, and for the most part, pulls calculations from cost category tabs. And then the final one that we're looking at in this set of 3 is your invoice history. And this is a running list of invoice totals and breakdown across those cost categories. Now, the next set of tabs, the ones that look familiar from your budget justification, this is where you will itemize the costs that you will be invoicing for, as well as your cost share contribution. Again, we'll be looking at these in more detail in each of these tabs. But for now, just going to do a really quick glance, so you're not looking at it for the very first time in our deep dive. So here's personnel. Again, you got your task, title, hours, rate. You have your fringe if that applies to your award and it has been approved. You have travel, your equipment, supplies, your contractual. This is a new tab, perhaps from the budget justification. So your contractual tracking, we'll go into more detail again, but this is just tracking a running list of costs per vendor and the remaining balance to date. I'm going to skip over construction. That's not applicable to our award. Then we have other, indirect, and then last but not least, very important, your cost share, where you will list your cost share contributions. All right, thanks, Carmela, for sharing the screen with me. I'm going to stop sharing, and we will pick up on the invoice summary tab. Thank you, Carmela. All right, so thanks. All right, so when you receive the invoice template, like we said, all DOE-related fields in blue will be populated. And this first tab, the invoice summary tab, you'll populate the yellow fields, including what invoice you're submitting with an invoice number, the start and end dates for the costs included on the invoice. Now, please note, if you were approved for pre-award costs, that start date can be approved, can be the one that when you were approved for the pre-award, and the dollar amounts for the invoice period. A friendly reminder that the negotiated cost share must be met on a per invoice basis unless there is a permitted deviation that is noted in your terms and conditions. Next slide, please. The second tab, the invoice detail tab, auto-populates information from other tabs in the invoice template. So that means you do not have to input any data directly into this tab yourself. You will have to copy and paste the last orange row highlighted with a red box into the invoice history tab, which will be in the next slide. Next slide, please. So again, you will copy that last orange row from the invoice detail tab on the previous slide and paste into the corresponding row starting at column C. And you will update this tab with the same step with each invoice submission. Next slide, please. Next, we are going to walk through the cost category tabs alongside some examples of what supporting documentation can look like for each cost category. We will go over specific examples of supporting documentation as well as what data to enter into the invoicing template. So the types of supporting documentation to include with your invoice package will vary by what costs you will be including for reimbursement. Timesheets or personnel hours are a requirement that can generally be fulfilled by a report out of the recipient's accounting system that details the hours worked by each individual on the project and the associated rate. Example, the hourly rate. For travel, this could be a travel report or list of all trips, including a breakdown of travel costs for each trip, has proven to be sufficient in most cases. Recipient verification may be required in some instances. For equipment, again, an equipment report or a listing of all equipment purchased and scanned images of invoices, receipts for any equipment over $50,000 must be submitted when required. Next, we have supplies. Again, a supplies report or listing of types of supplies included in the supplies total is sufficient in most cases. For contractual, we'll need scanned images of invoices for all vendors. Those must be submitted when required. And then any other direct cost report or listing of all other direct cost, and again, scanned images of invoices and receipts for any cost over $50,000 must be submitted when required. Now let's take a closer look at the supporting documentation for each of these cost categories and what data to input in the invoicing template. Next slide, please. So for personnel hours, we can see the supporting documentation is a payroll report and how the highlighted funding amounts match with what is shown in the personnel tab of the invoicing template. Please note the payroll report shown is coded to demonstrate hours worked and rates applied for the DOE project only. On the invoicing template, you will need to list what SOPO tasks personnel worked on, their title position, the number of hours worked, and their hourly rate. And again, the amount in the invoicing template personnel tab should match the amounts in the supporting documentation provided. Next slide, please. Next is your fringe costs. So these were approved to be charged to DOE during negotiations. You must show actual fringe costs that were paid to the employee and not just the multiplier. So on the fringe supporting documentation shown on the left, the red box outlines line items of fringe costs paid to an employee that add up to the total amount reflected in the fringe tab of the invoicing template as shown on the right. In the invoicing template, you will enter the actual personnel costs and your approved fringe rate to total the total fringe costs incurred. And again, as a check, the amounts in the supporting documentation must line up with what we see in this template fringe tab here. Next slide, please. For travel documentation, as we mentioned, a travel report or listing of all trips, including a breakdown of travel costs for each trip, for example, your airfare, rental car, hotel, per diem, etc., is sufficient. The screenshot on the left is a vehicle expense report documenting the mileage in which the recipient is invoicing for. Notice how the example highlights the specific line items in which they are invoicing against for clarity. The breakdown of costs is captured in the invoice template on the travel tab, including additional information such as reason for travel and how it relates to the award. And again, just like I said at the end of each one, just an important check to ensure that the amounts in the supporting documentation match with what is listed in the invoicing templates travel tab. Next slide, please. Right, so here are two examples of what supporting documentation for contractor invoices can look like. Both examples were submitted to the prime recipient and include important contractor and prime recipient information, right, such as the addresses and the award number. It also includes your invoice period dates, a description of the contractual services provided, and the total invoice amount that matches the invoice detail. Next slide, please. Right. So now contractor invoices, what does that look like on the invoicing template? So here you'll obviously enter it on the contractual tab. Each entry must include vendor or your subrecipient name, your product or service description, the purpose and need, and basis of cost. Please note that all three of those items need to be addressed in the indicated column cell. And last, the invoice period cost. Next slide, please. All right, so this new tab, so the contractual tracking tab, this is a companion to the contractual tab in the invoicing template. So to help track contractual costs per vendor, total cost per vendor will be entered on this tab. For each vendor, you will list the estimated contract amount per your budget justification, and then enter incurred cost per invoice you submit, as shown on the example screenshot, along with the vendor invoice number. The calculated fields will subtract incurred costs from the estimated amount and show the remaining balance of the estimated budget amount per vendor. Next slide, please. So next up is cost share. So again, our golden reminder that you will need to meet the cost share percentage outlined in your terms and conditions on an invoice basis. So the cost share percentage will ultimately determine the total dollar amount that must be provided as a recipient's cost share for the invoice that is being submitted for reimbursement. The type of supporting documentation submitted depends on the type of cost share contribution. So for example, if cost share is personnel, as we see on the left, then supporting documentation shows staff information, hours worked, and description of work. Here, an Excel spreadsheet is acceptable when your personnel hours are being used as cost share. However, I do just want to flag that spreadsheet is not acceptable when you're seeking reimbursement for personnel hours. So please just make sure to bookmark that in your mind. Next, if cost share is actual cash, so examples of supporting documentation include record of transaction via electronic transfer from the project account to the vendor. These could be journal entries and accounting software. This could be a spreadsheet or any other internal records that show source of funds and the allocation to the project and the expenditures. If you have questions on what types of supporting documentation to submit for your cost share, please reach out one-on-one to your TPO, myself or Beth. In the invoicing template, you will then input the cost share line items and indicate for each, right, the type of cost share. So this will either be cash from the subrecipient or prime recipient, or more rarely in kind from your prime or sub. And again, here, just a reminder that personnel hours, they are considered cash as staff members were paid wages. You will also indicate the contributor or source of the cost share, right, the prime or the subrecipient, and total amount of the cost share. And again, just to check the total amount of cost share dollars required on the invoice, and that's determined by the percentage in your T&Cs. Your dollar amounts in the supporting documentation should match what is listed in the cost share tab of your invoicing template. Next slide, please. All right, so now that we have walked through the invoicing template and supporting documentation examples, we have finally arrived at the last component of the invoice package. This is the SF-270 request for advance or reimbursement. This is a standard form used by grant recipients to request payment from federal agencies. And we have linked for you here to please visit grants.gov for the most updated version of this form. The key sections of the SF-270 include your request type, your federal award details, the period covered, amount of funds requested, a breakdown of costs, and certification and signature of an authorized representative. Next slide, please. Now let's look at the first 10 questions in the SF-270. So 1A, here you're going to check one box only, either reimbursement or advance. For 1B, typically this will be partial. You will only check final if this will be the last or only payment you are requesting on this grant. Number 2, you'll select your organization's accounting method, either cash or accrual. For number 3, that's us, the U.S. Department of Energy. Number 4, that grant number is your award number. Number 5, that is your invoice number that you have assigned to your invoice. Number 6 is your EIN, your employer identification number. Number 7 is optional. This financial assistance identification number, you can leave it blank or you could use it for your own tracking purposes. Number 8, this is the period covered by this request, and these dates should also match with what you have in your DOE Excel invoicing template. And then question 9, the recipient and organization, that is your name and address details of your org. And then number 10, your payee, so where payment would be sent if not addressed above. Okay, so those are questions 1 through 10. So now we're going to move on to question 11. Next slide, please. Right. So before we dive in, it is important to note that just like the invoicing template, some of these items refer to cumulative amounts. So just please keep that in mind. Columns B and C are not used on question 11. So we will stay on items listed under column A, starting with 11A, program outlays to date. So here you will provide the as of date, which again should match the end date listed in question 8 of the SF270, as well as that date on your invoicing template. Then to the right of that, we have a slightly confusing, a second 11A, and this asks for your total project cost to date, so which includes both federal and recipient share. This amount should not include current advance request items, so item 11B below, and may include a cost category that is 100% cost share that the recipient has paid. So for example, personnel. 11B, this should be 0. Program income should always be 0. 11C, that's going to equal to 11A. 11D, you're going to enter an amount here, both federal and subrecipient, only if you are requesting an advance. Okay, so otherwise you would leave this blank. 11E, this is a total of everything, right? This would be a cumulative. This is the past and current reimbursement plus federal and recipient cost share advance amount. 11F, this is the recipient cost share total for all reimbursement and current advance to date. 11G, that is your federal cost share total for all reimbursement and current advance to date. Next is your 11H. This is the federal share previously requested. And last is 11I, and that is where you will enter the current amount you are requesting. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have a complete example of the SF270. So as mentioned in the previous slides, it is important that the information in the SF270 aligns with the information that you have provided in your invoicing template. So some of those are your start and end dates, again, the total cost to date, the non-federal share, that's the recipient share, your federal payments that have been previously requested, and the amount being invoiced. Now I will pass it off to Anna to talk about where you will upload all the improved invoicing documents. Vipers.
Thank you, Ida. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So I know you guys have heard about Vipers. I'll say the long acronym one more time: the Vendor Invoicing Portal and Electric Reporting System, much better known as Vipers. So this is where you'll submit all your invoices. So to register, we have that live link in the bottom left of this screen, vipers.doe.gov. And that's where you'll go and you'll see the screenshot here. You go to register for Vipers and you can register using your award number and your EIN number. And then you will request a first-time login. And with that, you'll receive an email with a temporary password that you'll change when you log in. Next slide. I just want to flag, you see this on the top of like the next few slides of this important notice that invoices should be uploaded to Vipers after your TPO approval. And we'll just keep reiterating that. And as Mariah and I think most people in this presentation have said, that's really just to prevent any hiccups and help things go as smoothly as possible. So once you get that email, you'll be able to log in and navigate to the actions dropdown. You see that highlighted here, and you'll be able to select start the invoice process under step 2, highlighted in yellow. Next slide. From there, it's going to take you to a page where you can review some information, the agency record and the SAM information, and it's all pre-populated. And if that information is correct, you can select verify and go to the next page. Next slide. So on this page, you can fill out all the slides with your SF270 that was reviewed by your TPO, and that'll translate directly to the cells. One thing you can do at this point as well is to select the option to track your invoice, and that's found at the very bottom of the page. And if you choose to select this, you will get email notices when your invoice has been approved and when it has been paid. So after you fill out all those cells, you can select certify and submit. Next slide. So one very important last step, even though we just selected certify and submit, you have to upload your documentation. So there'll be a paperclip icon, and you see that highlighted in the screenshot on the bottom left. And this is where you're going to attach supporting documents. So 2 items that you're going to consistently attach are your SF-270, which you just used to fill on that last page, and your completed DOE invoicing template. And that's the template that was reviewed by your TPO and approved to be submitted into Vipers. Other supporting documentation should also be uploaded at this point as well, and that may look like pay stubs or receipts. And one thing to note is that you're limited to 5 documents here. So if you have more than 5, we recommend combining them so that you can still provide all that necessary information. And once all the documents have been uploaded, you can select the X in the top right corner and close out. Next slide. So that was a quick rundown of Vipers and how to put your invoice in. And we have 2 FAQs that you can look at. And I'm not going to read through these right now, but there's 2 different reports that you can view in Vipers. And hopefully that'll help your invoicing team track what's happening along the way with your invoices and the funding amount you still have, as well as the opportunity to cancel pending reports. And one other thing that I want to call out here is that we're often asked if multiple members on your team can have a Vipers account, and yes, you can. So each Vipers can be created with a unique email, and from there you can have multiple users and logins in Vipers all under one award. Next. So we're going to bring back up 3 pretty familiar slides. Again, I'm not going to run through these, but I hope that now that we have this background, we're a little bit more familiar with these different roles and responsibilities in the process of your invoice to get to that point of payment. Next slide. Again, the step-by-step walkthrough and really highlighting that beginning step of having your TPO approve that first invoice just to expedite the whole process to come. Next slide. And then just the final checklist that we recommend going through as you submit your invoice are the cost reasonable, allowable, allocable, confirming that there's no funding holds, ensuring that the cost share is met, checking the invoice dates and making sure that they don't begin before that award date unless you do have those pre-award costs, double checking that you've attached all the appropriate documents, and making sure that your TPO did approve before uploading to Vipers. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mariah to close us out.
Thanks, Anna. And everyone for hanging in there. We're almost done and time for Q&A. So we did want to provide some invoicing resources, and I am going to highlight the first 2 because we've already gone through the other 3. Ooh, sorry about my lighting being weird. But so first is the Recipients Guide for Invoices. And this is a document that will take you through all of the invoicing requirements and understanding those requirements. And the second one is the Vipers Instructions for Vendors. And that link is going to outline with screenshots how a vendor and you can access Vipers. Well, you can access Vipers. And then the other 3 are just some other links to always keep in mind or maybe star on your computers. And next slide. And so for next steps, as always, please do remain in contact with your technical project officer to ensure all award files and edits are up to date. Next is to ensure to review your award package in FedConnect when you are prompted to do so. Attend upcoming trainings and register for the commissioning webinar if you are interested. And that's going to be held next Tuesday, January 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just a reminder that commissioning webinar is not a required training, but we are encouraging it. And you can find the registration on the link to the registration here, or maybe one of my colleagues can link it if they have it handy. And we will have office hours this Friday, so tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Times for any that would like to join us. And then please do attend the next trainings with the the indoor environmental questionnaire survey and program on January 30th. And that's followed by the reporting training on February 13th. And with that, we are all going to stop talking and give the mic back to you all for some questions. Maybe Michelle, I don't know if you've been brainstorming some answers to some of them. Or if anyone wants to come off mute to ask their question, I will look through the chat.
Questions in the chat, but
Yes.
folks want to come off mute or put new questions in the chat, our team can answer them.
Mm-hmm. And just a reminder, if you didn't see the chat, these slides of the presentation and a recording will be posted to Box in the following days. Well, most likely next week because we're coming into a weekend, but they will be available to you.
Hi there. This is Chris from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Did anyone answer Melissa Lattice's question about the 25% cost share versus 75% cost share? And I can
Yes.
ask the question again too.
Yeah, I think I put an answer in the chat. So what I responded is if you have a 25% cost share commitment, that will cover 25% of the total project cost of that invoice. So it does reduce what you get from the DOE.
Mm-hmm.
And DOE would provide the other 75% of what was in that invoice.
Okay, so here's my question. We have our cost share being provided by another federal contract where the SOPOs on our other federal contract and the SOPOs for this contract are aligned. So in other words, if I have an employee that is working 20 hours on a SOPO for Pittsburgh Public Schools, I'm having her on her timesheet put in 15 hours to Renew America Schools, let's just say roughly, and 5 hours to a Department of Labor grant. It's the same activity. And then when we submit our invoice to our prime recipient, I can certainly show you timesheets that would show 15 hours of that person's time to DOE and 5 hours of that time to DOL. And then the description in their timesheet will be, SOPO number 1, training on blah, blah, whatever the SOPO is. It's a task that satisfies both contracts. Is that the way it ought to be?
Chris,
Or do I need to show 20 hours of the timesheet applied to Pittsburgh or to the DOE Renew America Schools grant? I don't know. How do you demonstrate that? How do you provide the backup?
Chris, I don't want to be separated. It's Luann. I don't want to have to be sorting out things that don't have to do with this grant. Personally, I don't know how DOE feels about it.
Yeah, I know. I've had this problem, this question on other grants too, where I have these aligned activities, but how do I account for it?
I think we might have to take this conversation offline. One of the restrictions of recipient cost share is that you cannot use it from another federal source. It will say that explicitly I'll just pull up like an example of another recipient, but in your terms and conditions for cost share, it says recipient may not use federal funds to meet cost sharing obligations. So you can't commingle multiple grants.
But I mean, and I have other sources of funding that also align with it. So like, let's take the source out of the conversation, but all right, well, if we can take this offline and do a deeper dive. Yeah.
And this is Melissa. Can I piggyback off of that too? I'm going to have the same issue in terms of some of my match. It won't be, it'll be other things that are not per se in the vendor's invoice. So anyway, I know I've kind of had this
Yeah.
conversation before, but Chris, you're not the only one. So
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
forward to the discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
So can I maybe just document the two, like the questions that both of you have together? So it's the general question is demonstrating cost share match. Can you just help
From
me?
your other source.
Yeah, honestly, I think we're overcomplicating this. This isn't any different from any other person's timesheets who spends time during the week on multiple things, right? It's like, I am not intending to send DOE every person's 40-hour timesheet so they can sort through which part of it applies to the DOE. You're going to get their hours as related to this grant, period. There's no reason for you to have timesheets for people spending time on
Oh, that's
whatever
great.
else they're spending time on, right?
I've had other clients ask me for the timesheets as backup. That's why I asked.
But the timesheets still can sort out the data to only what relates to this project.
No, what I'm saying is if I have my timesheet billed 10 hours to the Department of Energy project, and I have a 25% cost share that I'm supposed to provide, I've had other clients take my 10 hours and only pay me 8 hours, 7.5 hours. I worked 10 hours on the contract, they pay me 7.5 hours. And I'm like, no, I worked 10 hours on the contract and I worked another 25% on related activities that I charged to a different client. Same activity. They paid for 25%. Department of Energy pays for the 10 hours that I'm putting on my timesheet. So I've run into that problem where we've gotten basically cut, and then I end up not having any funding source for that 25%.
I think Michelle's right. This has to go to an offline conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's too detailed.
Yeah. I would need to bring in my accountant too. So I'm here on her behalf, but yeah. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Your question, Chris, in the chat about the IEQ training. And I don't know if we have sent it out, but we'll definitely send it out again if it hasn't been sent out yet. And that's on the 30th.
Any other questions? Oh, yep. Go ahead, Luann.
Sorry, I feel like I'm hogging this conversation, but can you go back to the comments on the irreversible tasks under the NEPA determination? There were 3. They were final design, equipment purchases, and physical activities. On our particular grant, because our subrecipient WSD is moving way ahead of us, we're doing a conditional NEPA, and all of their construction is in BP1. So we're anticipating they'll be able to move forward with their equipment purchases and final design equipment purchases and physical activities prior to final NEPA determination under the conditional permit. Is that correct? It's
Typically, typically a conditional NEPA determination does not allow for any physical activities. So right now, all of the second round of funding award recipients and selectees just have the conditional NEPA determination for just planning, design, and administrative activities. You all would, during the first budget period have to request from DOE a final NEPA determination to move forward with construction. So if you had that conversation with your, or you've hopefully initiated some of that conversation with your TP already, or if not, we can start to talk about that soon. And your TPO might be Beth, so I know she's out today. So I know none of us have as much context on your award, unfortunately, but that's the typical process that we don't allow physical activities with a conditional NEPA determination. There are instances where DOE might allow you to get a second conditional NEPA determination to allow you to do some activities, but typically it's not going to be construction. It'll be, maybe some, aspects of maybe purchasing equipment, at a high level, but you most likely won't be able to do construction without a final NEPA determination from DOE.
Michelle, do you, when you're referring to second conditional permit, are you referring to the second one after the one the DOE did on behalf of the applicants, or are you talking about a second one? What would be a third one?
Yeah, I'm saying typically we just do the conditional, and then the recipient request the conditional one, like you said, DOE has already requested for all of you all, but the final NEPA determination needs to be requested from the recipient once we have more details about your project and what you're planning to do at the WSD sites, for example. So I'm just saying there's a third option where you might get a second conditional NEPA determination, but that's pretty rare. That would just authorize you to do some additional activities beyond what DOE has already allowed you to move forward with our conditional NEPA determination. But that's not, something that, we would recommend for folks. The best pathway is to get that final NEPA determination.
All right, I'll follow up with Beth, because our understanding to date is that we are in fact getting another conditional permit in order to move forward with WSD scope. So I'll follow up with Beth when she gets back next week or later this week.
Right, well, we are at 4. So if there are no more questions from anyone, please, if you have one after this, you're like, oh shoot, please email Ida, Ida or Anna or I or anyone else on the call, because Beth is out. So please, if you have any questions, reach out to us. And thank you for having us. Or being here with us, not having us, but being here with us. I can't talk today. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, Ida, you have anything to say to close us out?
No, just wanted to echo thank you, gratitude. And I did say in the chat, if you're so obviously you need some more thinking time and processing, please bring your questions tomorrow to office hours at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Same Zoom that we've been meeting at, or not Zoom, I'm sorry, Teams that we've been meeting at. But please bring your questions there. And thank you all so much. We know you are busy people, so always super grateful to see you online with us, and thank you for your awesome questions, and we'll see y'all soon. And if not, have a great weekend. Bye. Thank you, Lynn.